Hello, I'm Derek Hitchins, and I'd like to talk about emergence. The photograph shows a pitcher plant which traps and eats insects, and that's emergent carnivorous behaviour in a plant, which is fascinating, but it's not actually what I want to talk about principally. I'd rather talk about emergence in general and emergence in man-made systems.
Hello. Emergence. What is it? How does it come about? Even, is it real? Emergence is seen as something of an obscure subject in some quarters. I have met many engineers who declare there is no such thing as emergence. That emergence and emergent properties are an illusion. Or some might say that emergence is when something goes wrong. Are these engineers right? Or are they hiding their heads in the proverbial sand? Let's see if we can define it. Emergence, that is. Originally the term meant coming to light, which works pretty well, including as it does a sense of discovery. Note the Fibonacci sequence in the flower. So emergence is essentially coming to light. A property of a system is said by some to be emergent if it is more than the sum of the properties of the system's parts. This whole is greater than the sum of the parts idea has been around since ancient Greece. Aristotle, there he is, gave us the whole as more than the sum of its parts. The part is more than a fraction of the whole. It can't be that easy, however. An engineer might reasonably see performance and aerodynamics as emergent, but will also add up, say, the weights of the various parts accountant style, and will produce a resultant all-up weight, and will be right every time. In such cases, the whole exactly equals the sum of the parts, no more, no less. So is all-up weight an emergent property of a system? It is a property of the whole, after all. Tricky one. To some folks, yes. To others, well, not quite, because it lacks any sense of discovery. It's obvious, or mundane, if you like. So nothing is really coming to light. To cope with this obvious or mundane aspect, some folks have come up with the notion of weak emergence and strong emergence. All-up weight would be an example of weak emergence, while self-awareness would be strong emergence, since self-awareness should puzzle us. After all, how does it come about? Is a dolphin self-aware? Is an elephant self-aware? If you could build a robot that could sense its environment, move about and do various jobs, would it be conscious? In any event, emergent properties are properties of the whole. For systems engineers, as opposed to some engineers, emergent properties are properties of the whole that cannot be exclusively attributed to any of the parts. So if an emergent property is greater than the sum of the parts, where could this extra come from? Logically, the only thing left other than the parts themselves is the interaction between the parts. These won't affect static things like all-up weight, of course, but they might affect dynamic properties of the whole, like reaction time, say, or dynamic equilibrium. Think about it. If there are many interacting parts and their actions are synchronized and coordinated, surely it's reasonable to expect the overall effect to be greater than the sum of the separate, uncoordinated actions. When all the parts work together to produce some external effect, we call that synergy, defined as the interaction or cooperation of two or more agents to produce a combined effect greater than the sum of their separate effects. So synergy might be an aspect of emergence. But there seems to be more. Think about the elements sodium and chlorine for a moment. Sodium is an alkali metal that is unstable under room conditions and can seriously damage you. Chlorine is a green choking gas that was used as a weapon in World War I. So both are inimical to human life. But bring them together and the compound sodium chloride is a transparent cubic crystal that is absolutely essential to life. Now that's emergence, and it comes about because of the dynamic interaction of the two atomic elements to form a complex shell of electrons encompassing the sodium chloride molecular nucleus. So dynamics are involved, the salt crystals do come to light, and the properties of the whole are quite distinct from those of the two constituent elements. Meanwhile, back at systems engineering, the question arises, if we could somehow create emergence to order, as it were, then would we be getting added value? Something for nothing. More bangs per buck. But is it possible to create emergent properties to order, or, given a degree of emergence, is it possible to enhance that degree of emergence? to advantage? Is there a potential added value in emergence? To answer those kinds of questions, we will need to explore further.
Well, thank you, Derek, and I suppose we'd better explore. The term emergent was coined by G.H. Lewis, who wrote, "Every resultant is either a sum or a difference of the cooperant forces. Their sum when their directions are the same, their difference when their directions are contrary. Further, every resultant is clearly traceable in its components, because these are homogeneous and commensurable. It is otherwise with emergence, when instead of adding measurable motion to measurable motion, or things of one kind to other individuals of their kind, there is a cooperation of things of unlike kinds. The emergent is unlike its components insofar as these are incommensurable, and it cannot be reduced to their sum or their difference." Lewis seemed to be describing what we might nowadays call synergy, and we've already seen that definition. You can see the men in the rowing eight there, and they are coordinating their actions, working together with great precision and synchronism to produce impulses every time their blades hit the water. That's synergy. That's one view of where it all started, but there is another view that back in 1912 this all came about when a German scientist was watching a rotating lantern showing pictures of horses. You know, the sort of what the butler saw thing. And he asked the question, where does the apparent motion come from? Because after all, these are still pictures. Other questions. Does a rose flower start off as a miniature rose inside a seed? Well, it doesn't. So where does the rose flower actually emerge from? We know about DNA now, of course, but it's an inert chemical molecule. 100 million year old DNA is in principle indistinguishable from present day DNA. So where does life emerge from? Then there was GESTALT, the idea that a whole something could have properties of the whole, and you could look inside and not find these properties. The example there of Gestalt from Gestalt psychology is the picture of the Dalmatian. If you looked in the bottom left hand corner only of the picture, or the top right hand corner, or the right hand half of the picture, or wherever, you wouldn't see the Dalmatian sniffing the ground. Not unless you already knew it was there. Then there's complexity, a characteristic of system with a variety and profusions in their parts and in their connections, and a convolution in their structure. Measurable as entropy, often seen as relative, so that one system is more complex than another. And there's also a perception, where the brain's ability to rationalize simple patterns may be challenged. And complexity gives rise to emergence. Then there's Le Chatelier's well-known principle. If a set of interacting systems is in equilibrium, and either a new system is introduced or an existing system or interaction is changed, then insofar as they are able, the other systems will rearrange themselves to oppose the change, and in so doing will move to a new point of equilibrium. Let's have a look at that in a stellar model. Here we are with three systems, a red system, a blue system and a green system, connected together by some ring arrangement, and we're going to look at their behaviour in terms of Le Chatelier's principle. In other words, if we alter one of these, let's say the red, and alter the interactions, does this affect the other two? Do they move to a new point of stability? Do they try and get to a new point of stability in opposing the change? Let's have a look inside there, and we see that we've got a simulation model in Stellar. There's green, there's red, these blue, these are represented by reservoirs, and they're connected by two-way taps, a blue-green tap, a red-green tap, and a red-blue tap. There's the input, which we're going to put into red, and this will make red bigger, because we'll put some sort of impulse in, and when we've done that, will it share it out? Will they all go to a new point of stability, or will it all go peculiar? Let's have a look and see. We'll start off looking at the input we're going to put in, and it looks like this. The input is actually the black line, which starts off with a pulse, which goes to 0, then a negative pulse, which goes back up to 0, and then there's a positive very sharp pulse, and the negative very sharp pulse. And you can see the grey is actually the integral of the other line for those who are mathematically inclined. Anyway, we're going to start with a pulse, then a break, then another pulse in the other direction, then a break, then a sharp pulse, positive, and a sharp pulse, negative. And these are all meant to try and perturb the system. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, after all of these pulses and so forth, does the system try and get back to level peggings? Let's have a look. Fire. Pulse. Starting to go back towards horizontal, which is level stability. Whoops. Negative. Going back to stability. Oop, pulse. Going back to stability. Negative pulse. Going back to stability. So it is attempting to go back to stability, which is marked here each time by the horizontal lines. Notice that after the first pulse we go horizontal. Then when there's a negative pulse we get a perturbation and we go back to some very fancy arrangements here, but we end up still trying to get level. So no matter what the sort of input going here, the system does try and level itself out. Watch again now over here and look at the various levels working in the dynamic model. Pulse, pulse, and that's Le Chatelier's principle. Moving swiftly on, we can see emergent process as described by Richard Searle in Culture and Complexity. He starts off with picture A, a system of diverse agents. In picture B we see that those diverse agents are richly connected, as he describes it. And then in C we can see that this rich connections between these diverse agents leads to emergent behaviour, an emergent pattern of behaviour if you prefer. And these agents could be ants in a colony, bees in a hive, people in a society, or whatever. And then finally in D we can see something that is perhaps a little bit new, in that there is not only a pattern emerging upwards, but from this pattern there comes down some sort of feed back down into the system which reinforces the pattern. Interesting idea. We'll move on to system thinking and look here at Hitchins' poached egg to see this in a bit more detail. Here you see the poached egg, so-called. It's a general model of any system. Here we see a system of interest, one we are interested in, and it has 3 subsystems with intraconnections. And the system of interest is connected to other systems, to other sibling systems within a containing system, which is connected to other containing systems we can't see. So we have a network, we have a hierarchy, depending on what sort of view you wish to take of it. If I alter one of these subsystems, it will affect the others through the interconnections, which will change the nature of the whole, which will pass interactions on to the other sibling systems, and they will feed their effects to each other and eventually back to here. So we might expect a reverberation. An impulse in here changes this system, changes those systems, and the reflection comes back and we can see a reverberation. That's in principle. Does it work in practice? Well, let's see it first of all in a video. Here you can see the red subsystem being changed. It's changing the blue and the green, changing the whole red as a result, and that change is being fed through the interconnection, this ring, into the green and into the blue. So this is Le Chatelier's principle, evident first of all at this level, at the subsystem level, and then at the whole system level. None of which will convince an engineer that emergence can also occur in hard technological systems. Perhaps we need a more specific scientific or mathematical approach to convince a hard-nosed engineer. And why not? So is there a mathematics of emergence? Well, yes, but it's not really simple sums. If we take an example, for example, of, I don't know, the average speed of vehicles in central London on weekdays. Now, the average speed is an emergent property of the traffic system. And because of all the traffic delays and the crowds and so forth, it turns out that the average speed is quite predictable. And it's been that way since we had Victorian horse-drawn cabs, believe it or not. And it's nothing to do with the performance of the individual vehicles. The average Ferrari Testarossa will not be able to beat the average speed when it's in a traffic jam or whatever. If we think on the other hand about the top speed of a motorcycle on a motorway or freeway or a turnpike, we'll find that that is unpredictable because it's so heavily dependent on traffic, road conditions and weather. These are all varying and chaotic variables. So we might be able to predict emergence if the environment that we're trying to predict in is relatively stable. We can simulate this concept of multi-level emergence with feed up and feed down. At the lower level, envisage a number of interacting subsystems contained within a whole. Say blue system. Explore blue on its own, then duplicate blue to give you red, join blue and red, and you have a test bed. Blue system, red system, interconnection leads to a test bed, and we can work on that using STELLA, which stands for Systems Thinking Environment and Learning Laboratory Approach. It's a very simple, inexpensive tool. Let's use it. Here we have the Emergence Test Bed. And you can see there the termite cathedral, which is complex, it's organised, it's actually compass oriented. You can find your way if you can find a termite mound. And it's air conditioned, believe it or not. All of these are emergent characteristics of the termite mound. Emergence describes the process of coming into view, as we've seen. Today we recognise emergent properties, emergent behaviour, emergent capabilities, and there's also counterintuitive behaviour, where an observer predicts behaviour as obvious, but it doesn't always happen that way. And that may tell you more about the observer than about the behaviour. The question is, can we understand where emergence sort of emerges from? So for the doubting Thomists amongst us, can we demonstrate emergence? We've seen the tug-of-war team before. Consider the tug-of-war team where they pull together. They certainly have more pull than if they worked separately. But there's more to it. If they can cooperate and coordinate their actions precisely, they can send such an impulse down the rope that the competition cannot withstand. This is synergy. But there's more. The winning team will change the tug-of-war scene. Other teams will try to emulate their style and will train harder. The winning team will also become more confident and they will train harder. And that's positive feedback, reinforcing their winning behaviour. And the whole tug-of-war environment may change. And that would be emergent. Now the model is really quite simple. It consists of a blue hole system, a red hole system, and they can be connected or not through this somewhat complex environment. Consider it as a noisy tube. This blue system here has within it a number of subsystems. You can see them here. Blue subsystem 1, blue subsystem 2, blue subsystem 3, blue subsystem 4. Red subsystem is similarly supplied. We can explore blue on its own, or using the switches provided, we can connect it up and see if connecting it up to a red system through the interface produces any emergent behaviour. Let's have a look at the simulation model proper. There's the simulation, the test bed with controls, but more interesting to begin with is the actual model. There's the blue model, blue hole system. If I click on there, there's the blue subsystems which I showed you previously. Notice there's blue subsystem coupling on there, which allows you to alter the coupling between the blue subsystem. That will turn out to be of interest later on. I can also show you, just to make sure we're not being deceptive in any way, there's red subsystem which is identical. It also has coupling, but that's set at a nominal value and is not changeable. So red subsystem stays the same as a reference model. Okay, before we start doing anything, let me just show you that this is all mathematical, that the whole of green is expressed there, and then blue model is expressed mathematically, and red model is expressed mathematically. So we have the whole thing as a mathematical model in simulation. Right, let's see what happens when we run blue on its own. Blue system not connected to anything. And we're going to put a square pulse in and see what we get out. You can see the square blue pulse coming in and the red response. Well, that's not too surprising, is it? This could represent any sort of system. We'll have a look at what sorts of system it might represent later. For the moment, let's just accept that we want a blue inflow from the outside and the response is red. And we might try and specify a system to do that. Let's have a look, not so much at the system as what's going on at the subsystem level. And we can do that here. Are we ready? Fire. And here we can see the 4 subsystems that we saw earlier, their behaviour when the pulse goes in. And you can see that they are coordinated and synchronized in their actions, and that's a typical feature of man-made systems. The coordination occurs automatically to an input because of the interconnections between the subsystems. Everything looks to be untoward, perfectly normal, sorry. Let's just raise the coupling and see what difference it makes. Remember, this is not connected to anything outside. It's gone up to 0.6, the coupling. And I've slightly changed the shape, but everything's behaving as you might expect. There we go, perfectly normal. Slightly different shapes here. Now, I'm going to take it all the way up to 1, and something different will happen. Watch. Whoops, it's got to rescale because it's gone off the top. And that's quite different behaviour. And what's happened here, we've got chaotic behaviour inside the system. It's sort of gone unstable within the limits available to it. Let's put that back to where it should be. Now what I'd like to do now is I'll first of all run that as it was. This is the subsystems. And this time I'm going to connect blue system to red system through the green interchange mechanism. And I do that using this switch here, blue and red independent to blue and red interacting. Here we go. Right, are you ready? Ah, no, this is somewhat unexpected. Remember, we're looking at blue subsystems, and what we can see is that there's a lot of noise in there, which is coming from various sources, principally from the interchange mechanism, but also there's a reverberation. This is going up and down, up and down, up and down, and it is not dying away to zero. The substance, the energy from the pulse is going backwards and forwards between blue and red system through green system as the interchange mechanism, and it's maintaining an emergent behaviour. And its reverberation, there seem to be a number of frequencies in there. It's a bit irregular, but it's a complex system. We don't know. Let's have a look and see what that looked like at whole system level. This is now looking just at blue inflow and blue outflow, but connected up. Previously blue inflow was just a square wave. Now it's a square wave, which is still there, but superimposed on that is the feedback that's come from red system through the green interchange. So we've got a lot more going on. But if you can concentrate for the moment on the red line, which is the outflow from blue system, you can see that it doesn't die away to zero, and it goes up and down quite irregularly, and is a reverberation. If I turn that all the way around to 1, where I know things went wrong before, what do you think might happen? And we can see that blue has indeed gone chaotic, even though it's connected up. We can look at other measures here. There's what's been going on within the containing system. And the first line here was before we took the emergence from 0.5, before we took the coupling factor from 0.5 up to 1. And that's with the coupling factor at 1. And you can see the whole test bed is going slowly unstable. So there we have it. This is emergent behavior. This is also emergent behavior, but it's not the sort of emergent behavior we want, particularly because it's gone chaotic. And that's because we overcoupled the subsystems of blue. And there we are. A demonstration of somewhat boring, but nonetheless real, emergent behavior. Moving swiftly on, we can look at that stellar model and visualize it again. And you can see on the right there the subsystems were initially shown as in a hierarchy structure as being below their parent whole system, but the reality is that they have to be contained within the whole system to make any sense. And we have a dynamic video version of the model we've just seen, the stellar model. Now those three bubbles were meant to represent any kind of system, technological, socio-technical, even social or societal. The previous three bubbles were too simple, perhaps, you think? Real situations must be more complex, less visible, more changeable. As you can see in this diagram, some of the subsystems are not visible, they're obscured. Does that matter? Does it make a difference? Not necessarily, actually, surprisingly enough. Let's see what sort of systems we could represent using these kinds of models. Integrated defense communication networks. And there you can actually see the various bubbles drawn out. Here they are. There's a bubble there, which is a teleport. It can't mean that. And we have AWACS and satellite systems, all of which contain their own bubbles within them. Or we could think about instead C4I star, which is command, control, communications, computing, intelligence, surveillance, targeting, acquisition and reconnaissance. And we can see that in a command and control system here, where we've got bubbles, 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 conventionally shown as rings in this case, reconnaissance level, command and control level, and the effect level down at the bottom. Or it could be an integrated transport system. This one apparently shows London, and you can see the London Tube here, and that's presumably the ring road, which would be the M25, and that would be Heathrow, Stansted and Gatwick, which ring London as a series of international airports. Or we might be talking about an integrated logistics system, and there comes that ring again: logistics, retailer, manufacturer, distributor, reseller and supplier, with the customer in the middle. Emergence and system design. From the various models, simulations and mathematics, we can perhaps begin to understand the nature and process of emergence, at least in societal and man-made systems. The question is, can we engineer emergence to order? And that's what we started out with. And I think we've cut as far as understanding that that will depend on the complexity and stability of the environment, and on our ability to model our designs and their interactions with their environments. So perhaps we can for stable environments with stable, predictable, interacting systems. A brief look at natural emergence, where we still have a lot to learn. It's very evident in natural systems. Each of these shoals, herds or swarms behaves as an extended system. It's a singular entity of simply connected parts. The behaviour in which they will move, the way they move as shoals or flocks, is explicable. But the apparent singular intelligence with which they operate is much less explicable. Hives, clones and colonies are self-organising, and they evolve complex, sophisticated emergent behaviours, practices and structures for nurture, security and survival. As do human societies. As yet the scientists have only limited insight into the Hymenoptera, the social insects. But then, if we're honest, we have only limited insight into human societies too. Natural emergence is still difficult to comprehend as whole system behaviour emerging from myriads of simply connected parts. And you would have to include the human brain in that description, which consists of myriads of simply connected neurons. For man-made systems, emergence is, however, real, it's self-coordinating, it's potentially predictable in some environments. Is it good or bad? Well, that's a bit of an unscientific question, really, because that's in the eye of the beholder. It could be valuable in right circumstances, but missing or counterproductive in others. But the thing is, emergence is not magic. It is comprehensible, it's explicable, and it's even something for system designers and engineers to embrace, to accept, to anticipate, to design for, or perhaps even design against, to predict and to enhance. There is potentially added value in emergence. More bangs per buck. Thank you for listening.